Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. It's Team List Tuesday, which means it's the NRL and news podcast. Joining me, as always, my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, it was a mixed set of results on the weekend from NRL, NRLW, all the way down, except for Jersey Flegg. But got a fantastic win in the NRLW, bounce back win in the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership, and we've got a lot of news to talk about. So how's everyone doing on what's been a really blustery, windy start to this week? Sixties, I'll start with you, mate.
Mate, I'm freezing off my you-know-whats at the moment. It's been unbelievably cold, especially at night. Last week I was thinking that the weather was warming up and maybe we might be seeing the back of some of the colder nights or colder weather, but nah, it's there and it's full on. And it's supposed to be for the rest of this week. So, yeah, we're heading for a very chilly period of time this July. How you doing, Clint?
I kind of feel like, you know, that it's in the first act of the Fellowship of the Ring, as the Fellowship, after just leaving, after forming the Fellowship, I should say, and they're heading up the mountains towards the mines of Moria, and they're pushing through the wind and the snow there. That's how freaking cold it is at the moment. I cannot wait for this weather to pass. Kind of like this season, to be honest.
Yeah, it's more than fair. It's been a bit like that for the Eels, being snake-bitten and cursed, and we were hoping that curse wouldn't touch our ladies in the NRLW, but unfortunately it looks like it's already impacted them after their glorious season-opening win against the Broncos. But before we get into that and all the other aspects of football in the week that was, a quick shout-out to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan and Parramatta, fantastic partners for the Tip Sheet and TCT in general. Love Greg and the crew and everything they do for us. Also, a quick shout out if you're listening to this on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and a subscribe. Help us with those metrics and analytics that help us in the old YouTube algorithm. It's a fickle little mistress, that one, but it does help. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe.
And John, speaking of shout outs, can I just also mention our podcast last week featuring Stephen Edge? So if you go to our Instant Reaction podcast, at the end of that, we've added on the chat with Stephen Edge, recorded live in Parramatta Leagues Club before the game last week. Parramatta Leagues Club, obviously, the home of the Eels, and it's their birthday celebrations throughout August. So make sure you get down there. But I wanted to mention that because if anyone hasn't listened to the chat with Stephen Edge, there's some incredible stories that he shared with us. Obviously, the generosity of Jack Gibson, comments on a number of Eels stars that he played with. But towards the end of our chat with him, we talked about what it was like to be in that very first Origin game in 1980. And he revealed something that was little known about an interaction he had with Artie Beetson during the game. And also he shared with us about how Madge Maguire got past Origin players involved with this year's Blues squad and what it was like and what it, you know, what Melbourne, it meant. It was a real behind the scenes story that he was able to share with us. So please, if you haven't listened to that as yet, you know, you might have listened to the Instant Reaction podcast and just stopped partway through. Please, if you can, go to it, listen to the back half of the podcast, because Stephen Edge, he's always a great man to talk to, absolute champion, but some of the stories that he's able to share are really worth having a listen to. So, John, that just about takes us through our introduction. So I guess it's time to get our news team together.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, I guess it really wouldn't be a week of Eels news without talking about serious injury. And unfortunately, it looks like our NRLW team may be heading down the same path as the NRL team when it comes to injury. We hope it stops here, stops now. But after last weekend, we now find out that Boss Kapua, the Eels edge player, is out with a PCL and will miss the rest of the season. And just as badly, Rueben Cherrington, as a result of that hip drop tackle from Nuwasala, the one that sparked the bit of the all-in push and shove and even the punch from Nuwasala onto Kennedy Cherrington. She's now out for the season with a syndesmosis, an ankle injury. This is how dangerous these hip drop tackles are. People are missing out entire seasons. In the case of Hayes Dunster, it basically put his entire career just about on hold. We don't know whether he's ever going to be able to come back how he was. But I don't know why these hip drop tackles are part of the game. Coaches don't coach it. Players say they don't intentionally set out to do it, but something is going terribly wrong because we're seeing these hip drop tackles and they just never happened before. So, John, do you want to add any thoughts on what's happened with these injuries or any comments you want to make about the hip drop tackle?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because when you think back through modern history and even beyond that, you know, we're talking pre-NRL times too, people like falling down to try and drag down like a big runner, you saw it happening, but mechanically it just didn't feel like you were seeing the amount of injuries that we're seeing now. So I don't know if that's just purely anecdotal, my memory's foggy in that regard, but it feels like we're seeing maybe back in the day, people weren't dropping their weight back onto the feet of the runners. I don't know, but the hip drops are an absolute blight on the game, and we see very seriously here why, with Rueben Cherrington ruled out for the season. What a gut blow to the Eels, and also Boss Kapua as well. Obviously, I don't want to sleep on Boss being unavailable for the Eels. 2 starters lost in the first round is pretty much as bad a result as you can get in terms of roster health and availability in a 9-10 week regulation round competition. So desperately unlucky the Parramatta Eels. They played so well too, boys. We're going to talk about it later in this podcast, not too long actually. It'll be on the menu, but they played so well up in Brisbane, and to have that happen, like I said, like what a gut blow. It's just so unfair, and I wish both of them a speedy recovery, and maybe hope against hope that if they can get to the finals, maybe Rueben could be available. Syndesmosis, it can go between 8 to 12 weeks. So if she has a speedy recovery, perhaps she could be a factor in the postseason, but who knows?
Yeah, Clint, it's extraordinarily bad luck for both players after such a magnificent victory first up for the NRLW team.
It's just an absolute shame, I know we said we're going to talk about it later, but geez, what fight, what spirit, what control the girls played with. Brisbane were probably lucky to get away with the scoreline the way it was because our girls absolutely dominated them. They controlled it from minute 0 to full time. So, to have this come out as a result, and particularly in Ruben's case, the injury, as you touched on there, Sixties, happened as a result of foul play. And, you mentioned Hayes Dunster's career that's pretty much been put on hold, and as a result of a hip drop tackle. It's bittersweet.
Yeah. It wasn't a great way to start the week, really, to hear this sort of news come through. But now let's see where things are, John, because it is Team List Tuesday. So that means there are going to be certainly some team changes that we'll end up seeing in that NRLW team. But let's start off with the NRL team list, and I believe there basically is no change to the team that put up a spirited effort against the Storm last week.
Yeah, spot on there, 60s. Team list Tuesday, and T-Baz Trent Barrett has made only a clerical or cosmetic level change to the team. Obviously, Dan Keir made his debut from outside the 17 officially last week, and now he gets to don an official first 17 jersey on his back this week. He has been named in jersey number 17. Otherwise, the Eels are, as per that program against Melbourne Storm, as they travel over to New Zealand on Friday evening to take on the New Zealand Warriors. And it wouldn't be a Parramatta game against the opposition. We've had a couple of massive inclusions for our opponents, and just a couple of blokes that weren't that integral to the Warriors in Shans Nicol-Clockstar and Sean Johnson. Only their starting fullback and halfback. So what more could they ask for coming into this one? And like the Eels, the Warriors have struggled for consistency this year, but they get a massive shot in the arm this week. So it's going to be a tough gig for the Parramatta Eels. Fellas, we know that the cupboard's pretty bare with the Parramatta Eels, but Dan Keir gets his second crack in the NRL. Any thoughts on that before we move on to the NRLW?
No, look, I was expecting that there wasn't going to be any team changes this week. I think what most supporters would be expecting now is that the Eels will pretty much remain unchanged until such time as any player might come back before the end of the season. But I don't think we're expecting that for another 2 to 3 weeks, with the likelihood of maybe Kelma being available again. I'm just trying to think who else might be available again. Can you help
possibly
me?
Marcus, possibly Marcus
Yes.
Seaver for the last 2 games or so.
Yeah. So, not a great deal of change that we can expect. But Clint, did you have any different expectations to that? Were you expecting pretty much the same team to run out again this week?
Well, look, you mentioned as such in your bumpers up post earlier today, 60s. It was a 9 out of 10 effort from the Eels against Melbourne. Some statistics in the game would probably suggest if we had a couple of those regular first graders out there, we'd probably get the job done. Certainly Mitchell Moses would have made a difference in that game with the possession and the field position we had. And maybe in a different universe, some of those tries that we gifted the Storm off. Some pretty poor errors don't happen as well, but the effort was there, and I guess it's an acknowledgement of the effort from that game. Personally, I would like to see us potentially experiment with Ethan Sanders at halfback for the rest of the season, if not for anything else other than having a tried and true kicking game out there for the boys. And the argument would be he's going to Canberra, so why should we be helping his development? Well, we've got him available to us this year and at this point in time, and we should be doing everything we can to avoid coming last. And that, if that means putting him out on the field and as an option in our best 17, then we should absolutely be considering that.
Yeah, well, I think it was known that he was going to Canberra when he was playing a few games in first grade earlier this season. So I don't know that it necessarily changes too much. So, John, let's now move on to the NRLW team list.
Yeah, unfortunately for Coach Steve Georgallis, doesn't get to name the same 17 that took down the Broncos in such wonderful fashion. He's had 2 enforced changes, like we mentioned, in Rueben, Cherrington and Boss Kapua. So he's made the subsequent changes. At fullback, it's Abby Church. Wings, Zoe Fay and Monique Donovan. Rory Owen and Rosie Kelly round out an unchanged backline that acquitted themselves very well against the dynamic Brisbane Broncos. Toi Hickel and Pearson are in the halves. Elsie Albert, Maddie Jones, in the front row. Tanaka Todd-Hunter gets promoted from the utility role on the interchange to starting dummy half. Chloe Jackson gets called up from the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership. She'll start on one edge, I believe the right edge, with Mahalia Murphy on the other side. Kendi Cherrington locks the scrum. Rosemary Beckett now comes onto the bench for the team as that utility role, where I expect she'll be platooning from dummy half with Tanaka. And then Tyler Amiatu, Jay Fanua, and Ruby Jean Kennard Ellis were all factors in the game last week and will be on the interchange for the game against the Cronulla Sharks. Extended roster: Tafawa Asua, Pahuka Berryman Duff, Chelsea Makira, Kate Fallon, and Yasmin Baker. And taking on a Cronulla Sharks team that had a very solid 14-0 shutout of the Cowboys in round one, fellas, and it's plenty of our former Eels or recognisable names in that team. Penatani, Preston, Johnston, we got Anderson, and then Foliaki, I believe, alongside Davis Walsh in their extended roster. So lots of former Eels there turning out for the Sharks, and it's going to be a real cracker of a game. The only shame is it's being billed as a Parramatta home game, but it's out at Allianz. So it's a faux home game, I suppose, one of those ones that they count against your allotment of home games, but you don't get any sort of advantage.
Yeah, and I think we've had a few of those over the years with the NRLW team. What I will say there is the inclusion of Chloe Jackson in the back row. She was an absolute workaholic in the Harvey Norman women's team's victory over the Rabbitohs on the weekend, and I'll talk a little bit more about that performance when we do our wrap-up of the weekend results. Clint, are they the changes that you expected in the NRLW team?
Given the unavailabilities of the injured players, it seems pretty plug and play from Coach Georgallis, doesn't it? So it all makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. John, that now leads us to the New South Wales Cup team list.
Yeah, Eels looking to bounce back from a tough loss to the Newtown Jets over at Henson Park for the beer on the same weekend as the Beer One and Footy Festival, and they've got a couple of changes this week. I'm not on board with all of them, I've got to say, fellas. A bit disappointing in the back line, where we see Zach Sini at fullback. Not disappointing for Zach, sorry, I phrased that very poorly. But we see young Moe Alamadine getting dropped as the Eels go with Lorenzo Militalo and Isaac Lumilumi on the flanks. I've managed to copy-paste the wrong team list here, it looks like, unfortunately. But Iraz Namva and not Samuel Loyes, who was in the centres, with Morgan Harper named in the other centre position, 60s. But are we expecting him to play this week? Because that was a nasty knee injury he sustained against the Warriors a few weeks back.
Yes, I am expecting him to play this
so
week.
a boost to the back line there for the Eels of Harper coming back as their experienced vet in the centres. Lynn and Sanders to pair together in the halves. Ogden, Makatoa named at bookends. Matt Arthur at dummy half. Back row sees Jock Brazel, Matt Dury on the edges. Brock Parker at lock forward. On the interchange, Manny Luke to dummy half utility. Tony Matteelli, Saxon Pryke and Reece Alderton the forwards. Kyle Castle, the 18th man or concussion sub. And they're also on the plane across the Tasman this week as the curtain raiser at 3:15 p.m. against New Zealand Warriors at Go Media Stadium in Auckland.
Yeah, I think it's, again, I'm not entirely surprised by what the team list is this week. What did they end up announcing a crowd that was different to the 8,972 or whatever they like to announce it?
You can't imagine. It's just part of their tradition, whether they've got 50 people there or they've got 15,000.
Yeah, because it was certainly a big crowd in attendance for the New South Wales Cup. I would imagine there were some players out there on the field for Parramatta who hadn't played in front of a crowd of that size before.
No. Yeah, so, pretty big turnout for the festival and the football. So I imagine it would have been a pretty, maybe a career high moment for some of those guys.
Yeah, so I don't know. It was a big ask for how the team's going for them to be able to get the job done against Newtown last week. I sort of have the same expectations with this team now as what I do for the NRL team. Each week's going to be hard for them to get up. I think they're obviously subjected to having the players missing through injury that the NRL team is as well. So, look, I guess the important thing for them is they get to be part of the match day at the NRL venue. So, but I don't really have too much to say about the team list. It's pretty much as I expected. Clint, anything you want to add?
No, not really. I mean, at this point, you just want to see the boys continuing to fight for every inch. They had a little bit of a renaissance in the middle of the season, the New South Wales Cup boys, but by virtue of what's happened to the NRL team, their side has in turn been decimated and affected with mass ins and outs every week. So they go up against a very strong Warriors New South Wales Cup side. who sits above them in the table by 4 or 5 places, I think it is. So you just want to see the boys giving it their all and put themselves in the best possible position to win.
Yeah, and a bit disappointed to see Alamadine go back to Flegg. I think maybe he's got something he's working on there, but they kept the Raz Namva up there, and obviously there's a couple other guys, Pryke, Parker, Brazel, I know he's not long for the club now, but Matty Arthur as well. But yeah, I don't know. It just I feel like it would have been better for long-term development to have him in the mix here, playing some more physical football.
Yeah. It's I think we spoke about that some time ago about elevating players, and let's see what they're capable of. I guess there's probably a limitation to doing that, and that now brings us to the Jersey Flegg team, who, John, are very much still in contention for a finals berth. Yeah,
well, they're the biggest beneficiaries of Muhammad getting dropped back to this grade. So he forms part of a good-looking back line with Zach Hunter at fullback. Then he's on one wing with Ollie McCarthy on the other, Devonta Vivella and Antioch Vitala Mariner in the centres. So a real good back line there. Arpa Twiddle, Matty Hunter in the halves. Big front row of Sam Tuivasa and Tink and Brown as the bookends to Rawi Smith, who's been one of the standouts this year at dummy half. On the back row, we had a bit of a double take moment when the team list was finally revealed, 60s, but it's listed as Dominic Ferrugia on the edges alongside Josiah Funayuta on the other side, but we do believe that was a clerical mistake, and that's Dom Destratus, not Dom Ferrugia, making his Flegg debut in a position that he's never played before, given that he's a specialist winger. I wrote about it in my team list blog saying, I'm not sure if this is like a positional change and we didn't really see it coming and they're just trying to get a talented young player into the team somehow, but we do believe that is a clerical error, which means that the scrum is then locked out by Tyrese Lakenny. So it's a very young back row there, Domi Destratus, Josiah Funayuta and Tyrese, all being very good performers in this grade though. And then on the interchange, you got Yaya Ayachi's the dummy half utility, Dom's twin brother Raf Destratus as another back row option, then Max Tupou, Damascus Nemi rounding out the rotation, Michael Abdo, the concussion sub or 18th man.
Yeah, look, they've been able to settle on a fairly stable back line. There's been the odd change that's been forced because of New South Wales Cup requirements, but it's most of those changes have really been about maybe an inclusion on the wing with Mohamed Alamadine elevated, or Arpa Twiddle swapping between fullback and the halves. But apart from that, it's been a fairly consistent team, and they've achieved the results that they've needed to. So again, I like the look of this team that they've named this week. Clint, anything you'd like to add at all there?
Probably that the boys continue to chase it. We said a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about the theatrical end to the Jersey Flegg season last season, and how this is currently trending towards something not too dissimilar. The Warriors have a pretty handy side in this grade as well, lads. And obviously going over there, it's always tough to come away with a win in any grade. So a victory here sets them up really, really well to go into the closing rounds and try and secure a finals berth.
And John, that now leaves us to finish up with the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership side as announced today.
Yeah, our girls snapped a 2-game losing streak with a solid win against the South Sydney Rabbitohs. I think it was 18-14 at a home game there at Eric Tweedale. So well done to the girls. And levels their season out at 2-2 now, so they're right in the hunt. And they now take on the Cronulla Sharks, and they look like this. Yasmin Baker at fullback, Debbie Dwahi and Shay Shipton on the flanks, Caitlin Pearden and Aaliyah Hamano in the centres, Tara Bambut and Sarah Dimmick, the two playmakers in the 6 and 7. Front row is Alita Namose and Tafoa Asua, who is the 18th player in reserve for the NRLW as well. They're named to start at bookends. Chelsea Makira, the dummy half. In the back row, Chelsea. Chloe Jackson has been named to play, so that's going to be a big asterisk right there, given that she is starting in the NRLW. So we expect to see a game day change in the back row for the Eels here. And as always, Tuisha Maieva captains the team from the other edge. Riverley, Arlo, the lock forward, so a couple of young back rows there doing really well. Interchange, you've got Ashley Pottinger, Lasalio Sita-Payne, Raishi Farmasili, and Fontaine Tafua. So looking at that interchange, I'd probably expect Fontaine to come into the starting team on the edge. And then from the extended roster, you've got Tahila Valuanga, Caitlin Stanley, Bella Sanford, and Kate Fallon. So one of those players to come into the rotation as part of that sort of two-step change.
I think probably Bella might come in.
Mm-hmm.
As you suggested, Fontaine probably likely into the starting team, and in fact she came into the starting team last week as a match day change. So I'd certainly be expecting that. And I guess the only other news that we were able to pick up on over the weekend was that Raf Perigo was suspended for 2 weeks for a lifting tackle in the previous round. So that's why we don't have her in the team list this week. She was named last week, but that was obviously before the decision was handed down by the judiciary. So, again, pretty much an expected team given the performance last week. Clint, over to you. Anything there you want to add, mate?
Well, our girls in the Harvey Norman New South Wales Premiership find themselves in the middle of the table with the 2-2 record. So coming up against the Sharks, who were 1-3, it's certainly one of those swing games in this type of competition. So, it's critical the girls get the job done if their finals hopes in and building towards a final season in this competition is to eventuate. So. These are the type of games that they need to win if they have those aspirations. So I'm looking, irrespective of what will be a couple of changes to the side, for the girls to get the job done.
Okay, so fellas, this brings us to any final closing thoughts about each of the Eels games last week, and we'll be nice and brief because we've certainly done a full reaction to the Eels NRL result, but we'll just get some closing thoughts. So, Clint, anything you want to add about the Eels NRL loss to the Storm on Friday night?
It's hard to be critical because of the state of play. The boys gave it their all, and as supporters, that's all you can really ask for. Given the injury predicament, the unavailability of first-string players and genuine stars of our side, coming up against the competition leaders who've only dropped 3 games all year and gave us an absolute spanking in Magic Round. Short of a victory, a miraculous 1 in 1,000 chance victory, we probably couldn't have asked much more than what we got. And San a couple of unforced errors that may have eventuated. And for me, I look at that performance as a launch pad for some of these guys for the rest of their season. That needs to be the benchmark for our remaining games for a lot of these boys' performances. As long as we continue to do that, we give ourselves the opportunity to find our next win. When that comes, to be seen, if at all. But I think they can walk off the field with their heads held high.
Yeah, John, we pretty much discussed similar sentiment after, during our instant reaction podcast on Friday night. It was, as Clint suggested, it was hard to be critical in any way. Well, I think the effort deserved praise. The execution, maybe not so much. Again, there was a couple of instances of gifting tries to the Storm. Take that out, and it's an awful lot closer. Of course, the Storm, I think, were perfect from the kicking tee, which also blew the score out just a little bit more than maybe what the Storm deserved. But when it came to the class factor, the Storm probably had the edge on us there.
Yeah, absolutely. You saw a team in the Melbourne Storm that are obviously playing tremendous football, and they've had their issues with injury this year, but they were back at full strength or close enough coming into that game against Parramatta, and even lacking a couple of gears against the Eels, and they played some of their sloppiest football. They just had the sheer golf and talent difference in order to sort of absorb what we threw at them, and we threw a lot at them as messy and inconsistent as it was at times in terms of execution and application. But they absorbed it and then had a little bit of luck go their way in a couple of their tries, and they were too good. And as we said in that instant reaction, a genuine A+ for effort across the board, I think. Even on some of the players that we were critical of, I think that the effort was still very good. But some of those lapses were brutal, and that's just how it is when things are bad. Your mistakes that would usually just be a turnover can result in 10-point swings or 12-point swings, depending on your view of the goal kicking, and that was the case a couple of times for the Parramatta Eels. So if they bring the same energy to the bulk of their games for the remainder of the season, I can't be too critical of the team. I think it'll be, obviously you want to see some wins and you want to see them build towards next year, but if they can dig deep the way they did, and not just for Guffo's 200th as a Parramatta Eel, but for the remainder of the season, then I think they'll have a chance of winning a few games.
Yeah, I'd like to think that maybe the Dragons game might be a chance, and who knows? We don't want it to come down to the last round against the Tigers and needing them to win away from home, but it gives us hope that they are in the shot to get a game or two before the end of the season. There was a global bye in the Flegs, so the only other men's game was the New South Wales Cup. Again, it was they let themselves down. This time, probably more so in the first half than the second half, which has been the case lately. They really did let it get away from them early, John.
Yeah, I unfortunately was able to watch this one, but I was sneaking some looks at the score updates in the middle of the cinema as I was watching the new Deadpool and Wolverine release, and yeah, frustrating result, and unfortunately they've gone from knocking on the door to the finals to probably being on the outside looking in now, and again, attrition and player availability has hurt them as much as any other grade in the competition for the Eels, and they've really been victims to things outside their control after that slow start to the season.
Yeah, and Clint, it was a case of they did steady a little bit after such a shocking start to the game, and I guess it was in the end the score line was reasonably respectable if you can accept a loss, but they're probably going to need to find something a lot more than what they've found in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. The positive is that they ended better than they started, and sometimes you can use that as a launch pad into future games. But that being said, as Forty so eloquently put it, the finals are probably going to be a bit beyond this boy's reach at the moment, particularly in a very hotly contested mid-table in the New South Wales Cup. The Jets themselves have been strong performers in this grade for a number of years now. And really, they are the victims, as you mentioned before, or both of you mentioned before, of that poor start. I think back to that opening round game against the Bulldogs where Ethan Sanders' conversion hits the post that could have gone over, and potentially there's a win there. There's the game against West on Easter Monday as well, where they had a 1998 grand final qualifier-esque lead in the last 10 minutes only to be run down. There's 2 swing games already, and you look at the table. And that suddenly propels them up probably into 5th position now, and they're in control of their own destiny with those 2 matches alone, as opposed to fighting to be in the fight. So, I said before, it's about them putting their best performances forward for the rest of the year now, and giving themselves the best possible chance. But for some of these boys, it's also about positioning themselves for the future coaching staff. There's some boys that would be on both development deals and bottom top 30 deals for next year, and also some that might be fighting for some, whether at this club or other clubs. So still plenty for them to play for. And the finals isn't out of calculation, but some things might fall their way yet. But given the way that the season's unfolded thus far, it's hard to see that happening.
Yeah, now this brings us to the NRLW win over the Broncos. We haven't had much of a chance to speak about this. It certainly wasn't This came, of course, the day after we recorded our instant reaction podcast to the NRL match. So we should take a moment now to speak about what we saw that we really liked in the win over the Broncos. For mine, it was exactly what I saw in the preseason training session that I witnessed. It was exactly what I saw in the trial game, which was that you've got an aggressive pack. You've got a team that's a bit fitter than last year. You've got a team that's playing faster around the ruck than last year. You've got very decisive shifts of the ball. When they do that, they're playing a much better structure this season. They are unified in defence. Again, they're aggressive in defence as well. And there's some players there, some key players that have started the year in the sort of form that you want them in. I think we've got, we have lost Rueben Cherrington. But after the weekend, I was thinking the Eels have got one of the best spines in the competition because Abby Church she's a very underrated fullback, and I don't know that I'd swap her for any other fullback that's out there. You've got Cassie Hiku, who genuinely could be anything. Like, she really could be. I mean, when you watch that game, the way she snaps her long passes, the way she can play what's in front of her. Like, there was one part there where she got an awful pass on the last tackle and somehow was able to manufacture a grubber kick from about 15, 20 metres out perfectly weighted into the in goal. And you just think, man, she's got something else about her. And we know that she's got pace. We know can brush out of tackles, but she makes defence look quite an easy task for herself. She's got a lot to offer. And of course, the big name players like Mahalia Murphy, Kennedy Cherrington, Elsie Albert, and Rachel Pearson, they all produce the sort of games that we want from them this year. And then, of course, the two Union prospects. I mean, what more can you say about their form this week in this first round? John, I'll let you take over from here.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much everything we'd seen in the preseason, plus opening up in Suncorp. That's a tough road trip. The Broncos are one of the most consistent teams in the competition. I know that Newcastle sort of supplanted them in recent years, but they've been one of the powerhouses in the NRLW, and for our girls to go up there and beat them in such a manner must be a massive morale boost, injuries or no injuries. And again, Steve Georgallis has done a fantastic job getting this team that ostensibly it is by and large the same team that we saw last year, where they won, one game and struggled all year. And now they're looking like a fierce, balanced, fast, dynamic roster. And like I said, that backline's been invigorated by the addition of a couple of rugby union converts in Kelly and Owens, who both look fantastic out there and brought some really nice pace in the centre three-quarter line. And then, Cassie Hiku, who for mine could be the best player in the competition if she really unlocks her potential. And yeah, she's such a natural, just a pure footballer. And like you said, that ability to snap catch a tough pass on the ankles and last, and then transition that into a really well-weighted kick. You can't coach that sort of thing. So really, really keen to see how that backline holds up. And of course, the backline can't do anything without a dominant forward pack. And we saw that. Elsie Albert is a sledgehammer out there. She is a tone setter on both sides of the ball, but especially in defense. Was so physical, and the Brisbane Pack didn't want nothing to do with her. And I think that the rest of the forwards went with her. So it's a reminder of what we lost last year when we saw a fraction of game time between Rachel Pearson and Elsie Albert. And I think that probably would have helped us a lot last year, having your two marquee signings out there. But they've hit the ground running under Steve Georgallis. And I know that the losses of Rueben Cherrington and Boss Kapua are going to hurt. But I think that the depth is there for this squad to pick up the pieces and get into round two and rip in. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how this team goes, because I don't think they realise how good they can be right now. They had a great start against the Broncos, but this is by far the most balanced team we've ever had. You know, ever since we were incepted into that odd sort of by season 2023, you know, the sort of lost COVID season plus that. Going before that, they don't compare, and none of the squads compare to what we have right now, both on players that have been developed and the players that we've scouted out and quite astutely bought. And I think that they can challenge. I know we pushed them, we slotted them as finalists in our preseason predictions. I think that's their floor now. They could go well above that if they continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clint, when we saw Steve Georgallis in the press conference after the game, he mentioned that he couldn't wipe the smile off his face. He came over for a chat at the Sunday match of the Harvey Norman women's, and I said to him, mate, that smile's still on your face now. And he was really, really pleased with how the team went. He pretty much echoed what he said in the press conference. And it's certainly what we're seeing from the team when you consider that obviously Elsie Albert's a big inclusion through missing most of last year. But apart from that, there were only two new faces in this squad to who was there last year, that being the two centres. So Steve's doing a fine job with this group.
Well, you know, the proof is in the pudding in not only the results, and there's a big scout that they claimed, that can't be understated, but the manner in which they did it. You know, John mentioned that LC Albert was a sledgehammer out there, but the forwards absolutely bullied the Broncos off the park. They didn't give them a sniff in terms of territory. You know, one of their tries that they scored came against the run of play, and you know we've seen Rachel many times, you know, for the Dragons and New South Wales, and even for the Eels last year, setting up Kimberly Hunt a few times with that crossfield kick, pull it off in the Eels' favour. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case on the weekend pass. But that being said, you know, it was really only one try, and we're talking about a side who last year were comfortably the poorest defensive team, but really, really, really struggled in that regard. So the 180 that has occurred across the off season, you mentioned 60, you know, bar a couple of recruits and you know the availability of our marquee players, it's largely a similar squad. And it probably just goes to demonstrate the potential that really existed here. You know, getting another season under their belt is obviously beneficial to their experience. But you'd imagine, you know, the results of last year probably lit a fire under the belly of some of them. We've got some representative players there, and you know, again, having the availability of those marquee players as a part of that group, and going into this season with a new coaching staff, you know, clearly a new playing style, new defensive style as well, has served them well thus far. But it's only round one. We can't get carried away. But like John suggested, you know, a benchmark has been set here, and you know, their ceiling is as high as they want it to be. They've just got to continue to chase it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we'll just wrap up the weekend with the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership team winning 18-14 over the South Sydney Rabbitohs. I was out there on Sunday to watch the game. There was also, I just mentioned Steve Georgallis was there. There were a number of the NRLW players were there supporting their mates. The team was facing a Rabbitohs team that included a couple of former internationals in Maddie Studden and Kiana Takarangi. So they were, and they were 3-1. 2-1 coming into that round from the first three rounds. The Eels, the reverse of that, 1-2, and the Rabbitohs led 14-6 in the early part of the second half, but then the Eels came home strongly, scored two converted tries late in the game, ended up winning 18-14, and it it was still a game where completions were almost cost the Eels victory again. I think they only completed it something like 58%, and they really can't get too far past that 70% mark in completions at the moment. So that's real. It would be giving some headaches to the coaches, but they do now sit with a 2-2 record. They definitely were a chance of, and were the better team against the Dragons in round 2. If I was afraid that this match was going to go the same way, because the Eels were certainly able to create more havoc than South Sydney were. Generated a lot more tackle breaks than the Rabbitohs, just as what happened against the Dragons. But they did come home strongly enough, and then held their nerve in the latter stages of the game, even after making a couple of errors that they wouldn't have wanted to make in the latter part of the game. So, given it's their inaugural season, the inaugural team, 2-2 record at this stage, not doing too bad. Okay, fellas, let's move on away from the weekend wrap and get on with the Eels news. Oh, and just before we wrap it up, let's also give that extra shout out now to Dan Keir for his debut last week. It was done without fanfare because it was, I think it was only determined on the morning of the captain's run. And I was there for that. There was no special jersey presentation that normally takes place in the captain's run. Just some quick speeches, a lot of handshakes for Dan. And then, of course, the presentation was left for match day when his father was able to present him with the jersey. And we did get some media coverage, Eels media coverage of that, which was special. And I documented some of Dan's journey in the Bumpers Up column today, and clarified with him a couple of things that happened for him in his journey, which was basically like a lot of players in 2020. He lost the entire season as he was transitioning into senior football, lost it to COVID, only got one match with the Raiders down there in that season, went to switch up to the Q Cup, linking with the Redcliffe Dolphins for the 2021 season, and then I think ruptured a pec in a pre-season trial, and that was pretty much the season for him in 2021. So after missing 2 seasons, he arrived at the Eels in 2022. He's really plied his trade. He's been the jack of all trades to an extent because of injury and lack of depth in the Eels. He's hasn't just been playing second row. He's had to play 5'8". He's played out in the centres. He probably may not have even expected an NRL debut, given he was the captain of the New South Wales Cup team. As people know, if you're named as captain of the reserve grade team, that's probably an indication you're staying there on a weekly basis. But he's made the most of it. Pretty solid debut, I thought, fellas, last week. And has retained his place this week. And, of course, the other one is Gutho. 200 games last week. I've said it before. I think he will be held in a similar esteem. He should be held in a similar esteem to the great Ken Thornett. I think when he retires, I'd actually like to see a medal named in his honour, or an award named in his honour at the Ken Thornett Medal. Maybe an award, a new award for perhaps the most inspirational player in the team as voted by all the coaching staff, or maybe an award for a performance of the year in a particular game. I'm sure that the club can come up with something, but I'd really like to. I think he'll go down in the annals of Eels history as one of the gutsiest, one of the best players to pull on an Eels jersey, and I think I'd like to think that the supporters will show him that respect as he gets into the latter stages of his career, and whether that be that he's playing at fullback as the coach's team, or whether he ends up in a different position as the next couple of years unfold, who knows? But he's certainly given his all and deserves all the accolades. And there was a whole lot of fuss made about him being at the press conference in his budgie smugglers when basically he'd given away his shorts to a fan after the game. And, to be honest, I'm all about the players connecting with fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's far more important to focus on. And I think if we weren't, people are trying to say he was given the thumbs, the middle, extending the middle finger to the club and all that, and disrespecting the club and turning up like that. And maybe it's not ideal to not be in full club uniform, or maybe it might have been easy to throw on a tracksuit pants or shorts, but as far as I'm concerned, that's the least thing we should worry about with Clint Gutherson right now. Fellas, anything you want to add about those two boys?
No, I think you summed up nicely. Got a nice little rugby league story in Dan Keir, and then one of the modern greats, if not the all-time greats for the club in Guffer, and I think you've paid him his due respect.
Clint? Okay. Well, we now move on, and fellas, there has just been in the last couple of days an announcement made by the Eels about their junior representative coaches for 2025, and all of the coaches named have actually been involved in Eels pathways, if not, well, certainly in this last year, they've all been a big part of the program, whether they've been the head coaches or not. That's so it gives some continuity to what's been happening in the lower grades, in the pathways. But just to run through it, the Lisa Fiaola under 17s, that's Ryan Walker. He's Ryan's actually involved in the overall female pathways space, but he's and managing that. But he's also now taking on the coaching role of the 17s. He's been in the coaching role for the Tasha Gale in the past. Also, the Tasha Gale continues to be Charlotte Henry. Shah is also the assistant coach at the moment in the Harvey Norman women's team. So she'll continue her involvement with a lot of the players, taking them through from Tasha Gale into the start of senior football with the Harvey Normans. We've got the Harold Matthews, Josh Hodgson, moving from, he's actually also involved in some of the management of the Eels pathways. He provided specialised coaching assistance as well to the pathways teams. Now he's taking over as head coach of the Harold Matthews. We have Mitchell Lewis continuing his role. He's coaching the SG ball, and the Jersey flag, Jordan Rankin, also continuing his role as the Jersey flag coach in 2025. Anything you fellas want to add about those appointments? Clint, your father Jerry has had a significant role with the junior representative program in recent years. Anything you want to add? Is Jerry likely to be involved again this coming season?
I mean, as far as I know, he's willing to be involved as much as the club is willing him to be involved. And I certainly hope, in being a two-time Club Person of the Year award winner, that they continue to want to have him involved. And he was pleased to see the coaching announcements. These are people that have been involved in the program and overseen some successful teams and been involved with some of our successful development players over the last few years. So some good announcements there, and he's excited to be involved again, as long as they're excited to have him again.
Good stuff, mate. And just continuing on now with more news on that pathways front, the Eels Female Academy have been working through programs that the Eels have actually now got a full pathways program for the young girls. They have academy teams in the under 14s, under 15s, and under 16s. So they've got a program there now which takes them through to the junior representative teams with the Lisa Fiola Cup for the under 17. So there's actually 3 years of development groups that will go into the players in the way of their training and preparation before they trial for the Lisa Fiola under 17s team. So that's terrific news. And as part of that academy background and program, the teams have the program has culminated with some trials that were played. So the under 14s and under 15s played trials against the Bulldogs, and the under 16s wrapped up their program with a trial against the Steelers. So it's good to know that it follows now almost perfectly mirroring what the boys programs go through in junior reps. And really the only thing that is missing at this stage is for the New South Wales Rugby League maybe to come up with an under 21s competition for the girls, similar to the Jersey Flegg competition, because there's a little bit of a gap between the Tarsha Gale and the Harvey Norman competition. Now, there's a lot of very young players at the Eels that are in the Harvey Norman women's team, which is functioning like a reserve grade team. So I'm sure that down the track, as there's more and more female players involved in the game, that will probably be a goal of the New South Wales Rugby League to bring about an under 21s competition just to fill what is, I guess, a minor gap in the progression for the female players. The other thing too, fellas, and I might throw this to you, John, apparently there's been some Eels Pathways players named in the Waratahs Rugby Union under 16 squad.
Yeah, as we often see, a lot of these young talents are juggling multiple, I suppose, pathways in their schoolboy careers, and a trio of our Harold Matthews players have been announced as members of the, I think it's the Waratahs 16s squad. Where is it here? Waratahs 16s, and that's Samuel Polly, Talon Rosati, and Cyrus Bloomfield, and that's 3 of the standout players from that Harold Matt squad this year. There's a whole host of them, honestly, from that squad, but Samuel, Talon, and Cyrus were certainly 3 of the form players in that Harold Matthews squad 60s. So no surprises that the Waratahs are keeping tabs on them, but the Eels equally, obviously, letting them progress through their pathways. And we've seen in the past with players like Tyrese Lakini, and then before him, Tepai Moroa, that the Eels, or even Will Penasini too, I suppose, at Kings, that the Eels are happy to let these young guys juggle union with league as they go through the school system, but obviously very keen to lock them up as blue and gold aspirational boys long term.
Yeah, and I should mention as well that each of those young players are part of the Eels Jets program. So they are receiving the advanced coaching and overall rugby league development program that the Eels have for their younger players. Most recently, they were involved in a training session alongside the NRL players. So they got exposure to the demands that are there and placed on NRL players. And I guess it was a bit of an eye-opener as to what they can expect were they to become full-time professional players. And I can tell you that they did put them through a pretty tough session that involved a little bit of a taste of what NRL conditioning is like as well. So that was probably and I do want to give a shout out to the Eels players who really embraced them as part of the session, and especially Clint Gutherson. Again, an example of his leadership with the players and the encouragement and the reminders that he was barking at the young players out there on the field. I'm sure that they really embraced the experience that they were able to have. So, and those three players that you've just mentioned, they're involved in that. Now, another shout out to the Eels too, because those players that you mentioned before, John, that have come through and have had their education at a school which plays rugby union, the Eels have traditionally not put too many demands on those players. We've seen some of those players miss a year of junior reps because of their involvement in the rugby union programs and the studies that are there at those schools. So I think that one of the things that I think the Eels have done well is that welfare aspect and making sure that the young players aren't overloaded with the demands of school and school football at a time when, if the Eels were to throw them into the rugby league program as well, it might just put quite a heavy load on them, and they tend to steer away from that. So well done to Parramatta in that regard. Now, fellas, just as we wrap up our Eels section of the podcast, and it's been a mammoth one again, there is a listener question that's been sent through for this week, and it comes from Chris Ricketts, who sent the question through via our Instagram. So I'm going to throw the question to both of you. He said, with Woods Arthur now moving on, what does the future at hooker look like at the Eels beyond 2024? So, John, I'm going to throw that to you first.
Look, it's losing Woods is obviously a blow to the club in terms of you talk about succession planning, the squad, and the timeline that you have in place for these guys. And I think in the short term, you're probably looking to someone like Riley Smith maybe to make a jump next year. And Riley's been really impressive at the flag level. We brought him over from Penrith this year, done a solid job in the limited cup games he's gotten. He scored a nice try going back about a month and a bit now. Nice little solo run late in the game. But beyond that, then you're looking to current Australian schoolboy, and he's a back row convert to the dummy half position in Lachlan Kanikis. And he's done a really good job transitioning from lock forward to dummy half, but he's still a ways out from first grade, wouldn't you say, Sixties? And it puts the Eels in a tricky spot now because they've gone from having what they would have deemed to be a long-term inheritor or a successor in that position to maybe looking at someone like Riley and putting a bit more pressure on him to step up and put himself into the mix. So I suppose I wouldn't say silver lining, but the other side of it is that the Parramatta Eels have traditionally not relied on a star dummy half because of the way they structure their spine. They've obviously got a superstar halfback, a rising star, a 5'8", and one of the most consistent fullbacks in the competition as their 6, 7, and 9. 1, 6, and 7 rather, and that means that maybe you could ease someone into that role without as much pressure. But in saying that, you're talking about the position that handles the ball the most and the position that's tasked with making the most tackles in a game on a week-to-week basis. So, yeah, Eels got to, I wouldn't say scramble, but there's going to have to be some paradigm shifting on their timelines and who they're going to look to maybe recruit or develop in terms of being that dummy half successor now.
Yeah, interesting too, isn't it, that Riley Smith it's almost like a second player coming from Penrith as Brendan Hands did.
Yes.
With the Eels recruit Brendan Hands to look at as a potential dummy half, and now they get Riley Smith there. John, behind Lockie Kanikis, Ezra Leota?
Yeah, and then now you're talking about real long term. Ezra Leota came to the Eels this year by way of Queensland, an area, a catchment where they've done a lot of work in the last, I want to say, 18 to 24 months. Whoever is the talent scout up there has been very busy for the Blue and Gold. And Ezra came to us in, I believe, his junior year of Harold Matthews' eligibility, 60s. Did we confirm that? I'm not 100% in that one, but he came in and he's probably atypical to the sort of profile that Parramatta's had at dummy half, whether you're talking about Budzafa or beyond. He is a more of an Appy Coruscant dynamic sort of prospect where he loves to run the ball, get in there and sort of be disruptive through the ruck of his running game. But he had a very good season, Harold Matthews. He was explosive, dynamic, sparked a lot of great play. And in terms of first impressions for a new recruit, certainly set the bar high for next year. So a name to put into your little black book right now, but that's a long way off in terms of first grade prospects.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm not sure if he is a 17-year-old. If so, we might see him then in SG Ball next year. Clint, what are your expectations then? Is it going to be a case of Brendan Hands getting the first jump next year? Are they likely? Do you think we're likely to keep Joey Lussick involved? If not, is it then Riley Smith making that jump up to be the next cab off the rank in a dummy half role? Or do you think the Eels might go to the market to try to recruit a value dummy half to have in the system?
Firstly, I think John summated the situation incredibly well. Certainly from an internal perspective. I'm probably going to look at it more from an external perspective here, and like you stipulated towards me there, 60s, see what's available in the market. Look, silly season is upon us, and we're shortly in the news section going to get into some of the wild rumours that have made their way into the news cycle in the past week, and a lot of things are in motion. Many of it is just seeing what's out there, who's available, but it only takes one move to cause a chain reaction of multi movements across multiple clubs. So. The salary cap situation is obviously the most important here, and a couple of players have been from other clubs been given permission to look at their options elsewhere. With Budzafa allegedly going the way of the Knights, it was only a couple of weeks prior to that I think his former club captain now there, Jaden Brayley, has been told, if you can secure your future elsewhere, we're not going to stand in your way. Someone like Brandon Smith at the Roosters has been allegedly told that his options might exist somewhere. And then you look at the players that are just are off contract at the moment. So, someone like I just have to apologise for my dog who wanted to be a part of the show there. But someone, and this is very much on, I guess, the more bargain basement in terms of output to cost against the salary cap. Someone like Zach Wolford, the son of Simon Wolford, comes to mind there, who's currently off contract at Canberra and hasn't seen much game time there this season. So, immediately those are the players that look available in terms of the marketplace. Obviously, some shifting would have to happen in our cap to determine what caliber of player and what expense that we can occur in that position. But at this point in time, Brendan Hands remains under contract, as does Joey Lussick, as does Riley Smith for next year. So there's some internal options, but I'd imagine as Coach Jason Riles gets his hands on this squad and starts to assess things, or continues to assess things from afar, I should say, he'll have an idea of the type of player he wants at hooker. And if it means that he has to go to the market, I'm sure he will find a way to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think, as you rightly point out, a lot is likely to be determined by salary cap restrictions, because for the Eels to be able to go out and hit the market in recruiting players, it's really going to be a case of they're going to have to free up a bit of coin to be able to go out and to spend anything on a player of significance in terms of a recruit, and it may well be that if they feel that they need to add depth to that position, that unless they're able to do that, it would be someone that's not going to be of huge cost to the salary cap. Again, thank you to Chris Ricketts for submitting that question. Anyone, if you have a question you'd like to put to us for us to answer as part of the news podcast, and especially in the Parramatta section of it, you can submit it through either the podcast post itself or through our socials, and we'll certainly endeavour to tackle your questions as part of this podcast. John, that finishes up a massive Eels segment of our news. It's over to you for the most popular part of this podcast.
Yeah, nothing too fancy to it this week, fellas. I was in lieu of watching the New South Wales Cup on Saturday. I was out in the cinemas watching the latest instalment in the Deadpool series in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Deadpool and Wolverine, which has obviously the titular Deadpool played by Ryan Reynolds and Australia's Hugh Jackman playing his iconic Wolverine. It was a very fun experience. I recommend anyone that enjoys, movies for the sake of fun movies sometimes, not for great plot and all that sort of stuff, but just really fun movies to get out there and watch it. And part of what made it really good was a fantastic soundtrack, and it was headlined by a little bit of Madonna, which was really the theme song of this one. So we're going that way this week, so hopefully you enjoy the, I think it was a bit of a choir rendition of Like a Prayer.
Well, that song might resonate with Eels supporters who themselves are praying for not just no more injuries this year, but for better times coming into 2025. Clint, I believe you saw the same movie on Saturday night yourself.
Yeah, I caught a 4 p.m. session of Deadpool and Wolverine, and I must say to anyone out there who's been bitterly disappointed, and rightfully so, by the Marvel movies and TV shows of the last couple of years, this is a nice palate cleanser and just a lot of fun. You're not going there to enjoy the movie for its eccentric plot and its ramifications within that wider universe, but it is just Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman having what I would describe as like a buddy cop type dynamic, and a lot of fun, and a lot of laughs as well. Plenty in typical Deadpool fashion, plenty of breaking of the fourth wall. So if you enjoyed the Deadpool movies, this is a nice additional chapter in that series.
John, and I believe you immediately after going to see the movie decided that you were going to test your culinary superpowers. Well, no, not culinary. That's the wrong word. But your ability to eat super hot food. Is that right?
Yeah, we followed up our stint at the cinemas by heading out to Darlinghurst to Wings and Tins, a little joint out there, sort of cubby in the wall sort of place that do fantastic wings and beer. And we had a lot of fun with all the different flavours, but we capped out the night with their quote-unquote Doom Juice wings, which evidently are made from some sort of sauce involving Carolina Reapers, formerly the hottest chili in the world, but now I think it's been supplanted by the Reaper X or something like that. There's an arms race when it comes to chilies, boys. It's crazy. And we all had one wing to go at the end of the night, and boy howdy was it hot. I did pretty well with it. I managed to eat all my wing, clean the bone off, and sort of just sit there through the pain in the mouth. I didn't get any pain on the lips, thankfully, but got some hiccups and did okay from that. Some of the other fellas, though, they struggled mightily. It was very entertaining from the perspective of someone that didn't suffer too bad, but in terms of culinary enjoyment, as someone who likes spicy stuff, there is a cutoff where spice stops being any sort of benefit to the meal. And I tell you what, those wings, they weren't that good. The rest of the wings, fantastic, but the Doom Juice, you're doing it for the challenge, and that's it. So nice little joint if you want some chicken and sides, though. Was it Wings and Tins in Darlinghurst?
It wasn't one of those places where you're going to have to wear gloves on the hand and goggles over your eyes.
No, you don't have to sign a waiver, but a little bit of cautionary advice when you are consuming very, very hot things. Always be cognizant of where your hands are going and do not get it anywhere near your eyes. That is a surefire trip to the hospital right there.
Absolutely. Now, John, I'm going to throw to you straight away just to quickly run through the results from both the NRL and the NRLW from last weekend.
Yeah, fair play, mate. It is that time of the podcast. So we start in the NRL, where the weekend started with the New Zealand Warriors seeing off the West Tigers 28-16. That one was over at Go Media Stadium. Obviously, the Eels then played the Melbourne Storm on Friday night, 32-14. Victors were the Melbourne Storm. Probably the craziest result of the weekend, the Bulldogs went up to Suncorp Stadium and whooped some ass, 41-16 victors over Brisbane, and that pretty much shuts the door on Brisbane's finals aspirations the way they're going. And the Bulldogs, looking more and more like legitimate top 8 contenders, go now to Queensland Country Bank Stadium, where it was a tight game between the Cowboys and the Sharks. 30-22 victors were the home team there in North Queensland. Big shootout between the Roosters and Sea Eagles. 34-30 was the end score. Roosters up comfortably, but had to stave off a big comeback from Manly, who had some dreadful injury luck in this game. So gutsy effort there from the Sea Eagles. Panthers walloped the Dragons 46-10. Nathan Cleary with a 6 Dally point effort right there. Then the Titans upsetting the Dolphins 21-14, and the rounding out, nice little run on there, with the Raiders way too good for the Rabbitohs, 32-12 victors at GIO Stadium, with the bye being held by the Newcastle Knights.
So, fellas, I don't know about your takes, but I'll start off with mine. I'm able to put a line through the likes of the Broncos, the Dragons, and probably the Dolphins after last week. And as for the Dogs, they probably surprised because at the start of the season, we were almost laughing at the number of utility players that they drafted into their team, and yet with the way that the game has gone, they've got a group of very mobile, willing, tough players who give them great versatility across the park, and their results are starting to prove that it was at least the right strategy to maybe get them, if not into the 8, then very much challenging right to maybe the final round to get in there. So, Clint, what was your main take from the weekend's results?
Certainly that Bulldogs result was, I'm surprised. I'm not surprised by the result, and I mean the Bulldogs' victory. I am surprised by the scoreline. Canterbury have been incredibly. I just say I've been envious of Canterbury's defence this year. I think they're second only to Penrith defensively this year. If we had the same type of defensive resolve as the Bulldogs have had in season 2024, we'd certainly find ourselves up much higher in the ladder. He said that we kind of laughed at them a little bit in the off season there, but sans a round one loss to us at CommBank, they've been quite impressive this year, Canterbury, and the joke's on the rest of the competition now. I mean, they're the ones who are left laughing because they got a bunch of misfits with a desire to defend for their lives. Performing well above, I think, anyone's expected output of them. So well done to Canterbury in that regard. Likewise, the Cowboys have been a bit of an interesting one this year, boys, because they've not impressed me at any given point, but they continue to get results and to I guess find enough ways to win to get themselves currently in sixth position with an 11-8 record, and they probably only need 2 more victories to shore up a finals berth themselves. They've kind of just been quietly be going about their business. Do I see them as a premiership threat this year? No, but they've certainly performed better than most sides this year, which is interesting because you think of the team that we played. I think it was round 7 or 8 or whatever it was. I think it was round 8 following that awful performance against the Dolphins in Darwin that we host them at Combank. I didn't see anything that particular night that shouted to me, well, here's a team that's going to be top 8, potentially pushing top 4 come the last 6-7 weeks of the season. But the Cowboys find themselves in that position. So they've kind of been quietly going about their business. And yeah, much like yourself, Sixties, I think a line gets put through the Dragons at this point. They kind of remind me, not too dissimilar to the 2019 Eels, who, they could find a way to get some pretty good victories, and then when they played teams of higher caliber, they just couldn't go that extra mile and find themselves on the end of a pretty ugly scoreline. So, I think their season, with a -92 for and against, is more or less done. They got an even record at 9-9 now, but I think they'll ultimately end up where they currently are.
John, any major takes for you from the weekend?
I mean, again, we're seeing some of the volatility in this competition. Dolphins getting upset. Then, like I said, the Dragons getting put in their place a bit by the Panthers. We don't really get any clarity on whether the Roosters are a good team. They had that shootout against Manly, got run down a bit by the end with tries to Clayton Failolo and Daly Cherry Evans with a injury-ridden Manly team in that particular contest. So, yeah, I don't know. It feels like Melbourne and Penrith are on another tier to pretty much everyone else in this competition. And then you got teams like the Dogs starting to make some legitimate noise. Although I do think their roster has some imbalances in it that could hurt them in the long term. There is no denying that they are playing incredible football. And like the Newcastle Knights last year, and like we discussed on this podcast, every now and then it comes up, there is no dollar value you can put on liquid confidence. The Dogs clearly have that in spades. They've built it on the back of a really stingy and miserly defense. And whatever flaws they have in terms of the balance of their squad offensively, they're making up for it in pure effort, creating opportunities and generating their own luck. So it's going to be very interesting to see how far they can go. I know there's been a lot of talk in the background about this sort of X4, not opposite of curse, I suppose, almost like prophecy for the Dogs, where, you talk about 2014, 2004, 94, 84 and whatnot. They make grand finals. And I think they've got a lot of ground to cover between there, but they're certainly trending towards the right direction.
Yeah, and have they? There's been a bit of attention put on the Broncos finally this weekend, but I mean, are they the biggest disappointment of this season? Because that scoreline against the Bulldogs, the Broncos still had something like 6 Origin players in their team. I mean, there surely can't be any excuse for them to be performing the way that they are this season. It's that they really are a shadow of the team that they were last season. And what I heard over the weekend in terms of commentators talking about it was there was a whole lot of excuses that were made for them. And I don't think there is a suitable excuse when you're able to run out the number of players of representative caliber that they are. They have players in that team that are the envy of every other club, and they are not producing. So, quick answer from both of you. Are they still any chance of playing finals football this year? Clint? Yes or no?
Mathematically, yes. Current form guide, no. But they've got a decent draw ahead of them. They've got the Titans there. I'm not going to rule them out. So I'm going to say a tentative yes with an asterisk.
That they do play finals football. Okay.
Well, I think
John?
I think they're a chance. Yeah.
John.
I'm going to lock them in.
Okay, John. Do they play finals football or not?
No, I think they've got too many issues in terms of how they're playing. And look, I think Kevin Walters obviously did a fantastic job last year, get him to the grand final, but is that the outlier year for him? Like, the body of his work there has been a history of underperformance now. He's obviously a fantastic bloke. I mean, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone that says a bad word about Kevy, but are they underperforming under his stewardship? I think that the evidence is starting to mount up that they might be. So I think they're going to struggle for the rest of the season. And I know there's a lot of talk about, Penrith sort of essentially sucking the souls out of their grand final victims. But for Parramatta, it made in retrospect, you could make a pretty compelling argument as to why it fell apart in terms of the meta shift in the game and how he constructed our squad and the issues there. There is no logical reason in terms of talent for why the Brisbane Broncos are struggling the way they are, even accounting for their early mid-season injuries. They are one of the most talent-rich squads in the entire competition by some margin, and they are woefully underperforming. So, yeah, put a line for them for mine.
Yeah, and the excuses that included, some of the players that were moved on, you're still, as you said, you're still talking about such a rich talent roster, and there've been excuses made about how young they are. Well, they're a year older than the team that made the grand final last year, so it's I mean, they've probably got a roster that they can do something with next season, but this year, yeah, it just has been very disappointing for their supporters. John, can you quickly run us through the NRLW results from the weekend?
First week of NRLW in the books, and it went out like this. If I just go back to round one here, starting off on Thursday night, it was a tough encounter between the reigning premiers, Newcastle Knights, and the Sydney Roosters. Knights prevailing 12-10, but it could have gone to Golden Point very easily with a late conversion missed by the Tricolours. Then takes us out to PointsBet Stadium, where I mentioned earlier today in the podcast with the Sharks with the 14-0 shutout of the Cowboys. Eels going up to Suncorp and kicking arse, 22-10 victors. Titans too good for the Dragons, 18-10 victors on the road there, and then a big win for the Raiders to close out round one out at Campbelltown Stadium. They win 32-12. So at the end of the round one, Eels are obviously sitting nicely in third place for plus 12 points differential, chasing the Sharks on plus 14 and the Raiders on plus 20 as the ladder leaders right now.
Yeah, look, as far as main takes are concerned, you know what? I'm going to make the Eels the main take of this weekend because I think they disposed of the Broncos in a manner which was even more devastating than I thought was going to be possible. So I think the Eels victory over the Broncos is my big talking point from the NRLW round one. Clint, what's yours?
It has to be our girls. It was a massive upset to not only get the victory, but we said when we were doing a review of the game before, but the manner in which they just absolutely handled the Broncos. Our forward pack just dominated them, very satisfyingly so. So we've got to be the big news story. I mean, the Sharks themselves had a shutout, which is a pretty good feat in itself, but I think we were the real story of round one.
Yep, John?
Yeah, I suppose we're looking at not a change in the guard because Newcastle out there after the round one win, but Parramatta Eels, big win. Cronulla Sharks and the Raiders are the new kids on the block from last year. They started off really nicely. So maybe the wind's blowing a different direction this year. Maybe there could be a bit of a moving and shaking in terms of the makeup of the competition, and the likes of the Sharks, Eels and Raiders, and even the Titans could potentially, make things look a little bit different in terms of the long-term makeup of the competition.
Yeah, and I thought that the Roosters were still going to be right up the top of the ladder this year and challenging the Knights, but I thought they were very disappointing in that that loss to the Knights, even though they had the opportunity to draw level with that last kick for goal. Overall, was not up to the level that I thought they were capable of. It's still early, but I don't know. I probably came out of that game with more doubts than anything else. Okay, we move on with the main news and talking points from the NRL and NRLW this week. John, Brian rumours about the Panthers shopping him around.
Yeah.
He's obviously not on much money. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, initially sourced from Danny Weidler early in the morning today on Teamless Tuesdays to record, it sort of came out talking about select clubs have been approached about potentially looking at Brian To'o, who not only is obviously a reigning New South Wales State of Origin winner, three-time premiership winner, and arguably the best winger in the competition, but yeah, he's signed up until the end of 2027, so it just seems so far out there that surely Weidler was either trolling or had bad mail. But the CEO of Penrith, I think, came out and sort of tried to pour water on the fire and put it out, but then 360 and then 9 News have both run with this story saying that he's not happy and that he wants to get what he's due essentially. And, when all these reports were sort of starting to get credibility and credence, it's kind of like, well, he signed long term. Did he grossly undervalue himself and put himself down for like 400, 450? In which case you could understand, because yes, winger is an undervalued position in terms of the cap, but he is a special player. But then 360 reported that he's on $625,000 a season. So it's not a case of not really being worth what he's worth. He's very well remunerated in terms of even the best wingers in the competition. So they also reported on 360, I believe, so if I heard right, that he's the 8th highest paid player on the Penrith roster, which maybe that's more of his grievance, that he feels like he's a bigger part of the premiership run than some of the other players ahead of him perhaps. But yeah, so $625K, and if the rumours are to be believed, he would like more. And I don't know how much more, as good as To'o is, I don't know how much more you can afford to pay a winger, boys. And obviously when you're talking about clubs that have money and a need, obviously the West Tigers are probably 2 + 2 = 4 in a very linear sense there. They've got the cap space because Stefano Utuikamanu has told them he's leaving. They've got his mates there in Api Coruscant, Sania Turuva, and obviously Jerome Luai, who's going there next year. But you got to imagine that if he is available, there'll be a lot of clubs interested, but there'll also be a lot of clubs balking at the asking price, because $625K, that doesn't even get you your foot in the door. So I don't know what's going to happen here, but it's very, very interesting.
Clint, if he did leave the Panthers, do you think the Tigers would be his destination, given the number of mates that he's got there, and also the fact that they might look at that as, we can keep some backline combination, some backline strength power that was so successful at the Panthers, keep them together at another club? Because I guess the danger of leaving a club where you have good combinations is the risk that you go somewhere else and you're just not the same player because you don't have the same players around you.
Well, I mean, to answer your first question, the Tigers, if he was to potentially go somewhere, seems like a natural fit. If you connect the dots there, that does seem like a potential destination, and the strongest of potential destinations if he were to leave Penrith. But much like 40 said, I don't think that he's if what he's currently being paid is accurate, I don't see him getting much more anywhere else without it adversely affecting the balance of the cap for the side that he would go to. And it might be a case of in his own personal aspirations, he's seen some of the other guys he's played with not only get paid, but also still remain in competitive sides. Stephen Crichton is still playing in a very competitive Bulldogs team at the moment. Stenfelina was playing in a very competitive Sydney Roosters team at the moment, and they've increased the size of their wallets. Jerome Luai, his best mate, is going to the Tigers. So the Tigers allegedly have some cap space now, with Stefano opting not to continue on with the Tigers for next year. But a lot has to happen for that to happen. I don't think Brian's going to go anywhere personally. If anything, I reckon this might be a bit of manager talk, just agitating to see what type of upgrade can potentially be negotiated.
Yes, now we move on from that to some injury news, and there's a bit of that floating around, strangely enough. The biggest injury news out of last week was Alex Johnson, potentially out for 6 to 9 months with a ruptured Achilles. The man's on the run to breaking Ken Irvine's try-scoring record in rugby league. I think he's obviously still going to get there because what is he, 29 years of age? He's still got plenty of time up his sleeve when he does come back. John, you've had issues with Achilles tendons yourself. Is it going to be a tough comeback for him?
I'm fortunate that mine was preventative rather than in reaction. So I had a bilateral Achilles release that intentionally weakened but lengthened the Achilles to prevent a snap. So I managed to avoid what would have been an absolute certainty sometime in my life of snapping one or both Achilles. And I certainly don't envy poor Alex. It's up there for like a top 2 or 3 worst injury you can do in terms of the recovery time, the damage it does to your explosiveness, and how it impacts you as an athlete. I think a patella tear in your knee and a significant quadriceps tear in terms of like your lower body, they're the big ones. And he's obviously right there with one of the big 3 there. And he'll get back to the field, no doubt, and he'll continue to chase Irvine's record. But it is a big setback, and I can only wish him a speedy recovery because while he might be a little bit overrated at some points in his career, he's been a queen skin off the field. He's been a fantastic servant for South Sydney, and he's been such a pro at finishing off tries in the back line, whether it's been the easy ones or the ones that require a bit more nous and speed. And big blow to South Sydney, and you always hate to see injury taking any player, let alone one of the nice guys in the competition.
Yes, Clint, he's certainly one of the good guys. I believe he's good friends with Sean Lane from, I think, way back in their school days. He'll come back, won't he, mate?
Look, you believe so. I mean, an Achilles injury is certainly quite serious. But that being said, he's been the end of that South Sydney backline for the better part of a decade. I'm sure the hunger to chase down Ken Irvine's record is probably something that motivates him and keeps him going. And he's not too far away from that. And the reality of a 6 to 9 month recovery, that probably puts him at about April next year that he's taking the field again. So I'm sure with Coach Wayne Bennett back in the fold at South Sydney for next season, he'll have plenty motivating him to get back out there in the Cardinal Myrtle. Yeah,
absolutely. So we do wish him well there. And still on the injury front, we've got, I guess, troubling injuries for the likes of Latrell Mitchell, Ronaldo Mulitalo, and Jason Taumalolo. They're all out for periods which are round about a month. Obviously, all still hoping that there's a chance for their sides to be in finals football. I think might have gone past what the Rabbitohs are capable of achieving now, but certainly with the Sharks and the Cowboys, both of Mulitalo and Taumalolo would be hoping to be back in action before finals football. And let's just finish off with the NRLW news that comes on the back of that injury to Rueben Cherrington. We had Nuasala, who had 2 issues. One, of course, was that hip drop tackle and the other one was that punch flush on the face of Kennedy Cherrington when the incident blew up. The hip drop incident blew up, and all the players were charging in. She gets a 4-week suspension, which is now effectively half of the remaining games in the regular rounds of the NRLW season. John, we saw last year Kennedy Cherrington cop a 4-week suspension. It's significant in the context of what's happened to Rueben Cherrington. However, you could argue that the consequence of that tackle, an illegal tackle, maybe it demanded a longer suspension.
Yeah, it's one of those tricky situations, isn't it, where by and large you want to see the judiciary and the match review committee rule for the process and not the end result, because it starts getting to a very dangerous place where, you know, the same incident might be deemed twice or 3 times worse if there's a serious injury, even though mechanically it's very similar to other stuff where, there wasn't the bad luck involved and there was no injury. In saying that, we've spoken about the NRLW and the problems they have with scalability of the judiciary. We saw Kennedy Cherrington rubbed out for the entire season last year for a dangerous tackle that, yes, it was dangerous. And in the NRL would have seen a player comparatively sit out for 3-4 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever the charge was. But it's a 9-round competition. So there is an argument about scalability. And then there's also the argument about maybe there should be exceptions for, foul play or, punching and whatnot, where it's about culturally trying to set a standard. So Noah Sala's probably infringed on 2 of the big no-nos right now, which is a topical penalty in the hip drop tackle, in which he did quite dangerously against Rueben, which has caused syndesmosis and rode the player out for a season, and then punching, which obviously the average pundit loves to see a bit of a brouhaha, and the ladies were certainly fired up in that one. We saw Abby Church getting in there fearlessly, taking on some of the big units from Brisbane. But yeah, Nuasala probably should be out for a while. And you probably shouldn't see injury factor into it, but the combination of the two things where she started the entire incident with a tackle that has been they're trying to outlaw this mechanic from the game, and then followed up by, yes, Kennedy pushed her and Kennedy got the reflective penalty both being sin binned and also was a contrary conduct or whatever the charge was. But then she then re-escalates by punching for no reason. So I would have been happy for the book to be thrown at her, and I think maybe she got off a little bit light, even considering that argument of scalability that I was talking about.
Clint, do you think she got off lightly?
I do think she got off lightly. Because the second I saw a closed fist punch take place, I thought, irrespective of there being 5 minutes left in the game and the result determined, it should have been a send-off. I thought it was a bit laughable that both players received a sin bin penalty in the game, and then subsequently, this ban here only being 4 weeks. I think it might be about 2 weeks too short. I think the NRLW had a good opportunity to show and send the right message in terms of what it means and the subsequent punishment for punching. Likewise, as John correctly said, the injury, resultant injury shouldn't factor in. But the fact of the matter is that a hip drop tackle has taken place, and right across the NRL and NRLW for the better part of the last 2 years, that has not been something looked upon very favourably. There's been a real crackdown on that. So I think those 2 incidents alone probably should have warranted at least 3-week penalties for each incident. So I look at it; it should have been at least a 6-week penalty in my books. And I get, like you start going, well, that's this percentage of the season and this and that. Well, they didn't seem to care too much when it applied to Kennedy Cherrington last year, so it shouldn't be applicable in this situation. It should definitely not be a case of rules for thee and rules for me. It should be the same rules universally applied. I think she was very lucky to get away with just 4 weeks.
Well, fellas, we end our podcast on a controversial note with our opinions on the suspension of Nuasala. How'd we come in this week, John? I'm going to guess we're around the 1 hour 35.
144, big podcast. Yeah, a lot to talk about with the introduction of the NRLW and obviously doing the round one review, the Team List Tuesday breakdown, and then the spicy stuff to come out of round one in the Nuasala incident. So, yeah, a lot of football to talk about. And if your listeners have been here from the start to the finish, thank you very much. You've managed to persevere fantastically. What's the word I'm looking for? The wherewithal to listen to us three, prattling on for a good hour and 40 minutes. It's impressive, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, so, and if you have been doing this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. All this sort of stuff helps with our metrics, helps us to grow. And if you are still listening on one of our other podcast platforms, we thank you and ask you also to subscribe there as well. It all helps with the various metrics that are involved. Thank you to all of our listeners. Again, we just get absolutely blown away by the number of people who get in touch with us, even just to say hello, especially the people that come and say hello at our live appearances at Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels. Thank you to our sponsors, Star Partners, Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. It really helps us to keep, their support helps us to keep doing what we do for our coverage of the Parramatta Eels. John, Clint, as always, well done, fellas. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.